welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex. Today we're going to be flipping through a story talking about college endowments and whether or not they should be taxed heavier in the new Trump regime. And of course, we will end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. If that's enough rambling from me, let's jump into our daily debate. So there's this idea that college endowments should be taxed more heavily, and this could possibly make up for some shortfalls, especially from some of the larger endowments. Now, my question becomes, how do you do this? Is it the money they take out of the endowment? Is the money in the endowment? All these sort of questions we'll ask and we'll go through as we read part of this article, but I want you to think about it and tell me what you think. Throw it down in the comment section so I can really bounce everybody's opinions back and forth. So, with all that said, let's jump into our first article, our only article that comes from the Gyro, and also they are basically referencing this text, which originally comes from the Associated Press. Headline reads, House Republicans mull taxes on scholarships and changes to student loan programs. And there's also been talk about going for endowments. So we're going to cover all of these. So number one, scholarships. Should they tax scholarships that you get from universities? The short answer, in my opinion, is no. Let me put it to you this way. If you start taxing scholarships, then the cost will become baked in and they will just increase the amount of the scholarship to offset what the student was receiving before to basically be the exact same thing. And then they say, okay, there's an extra $1,000 on the scholarship, and that is purely for tax purposes. So universities will just begin to offset it. And I understand that in previous years, how the system has worked is they say, okay, here are your student loans. If you use them just for school, they're not taxable. And if you use them for other goods and services or anything basically in the economy, then they are taxable, which seems to make sense. You're basically getting given money, and if it's not put towards your education, then they find issue with it. If it is, then it's no big deal in their mind. Now, why does it change anything if it just starts to go towards education? If they're already taxing the stuff that's not going towards education, what changes when you go to education? Because that would be, in theory, the argument would be, oh, we need to tax all of it. And then we need to ask the question, why is the incentive to not currently tax income that is going towards their education? We want people to be educated in our system. We do not want to create systems. And basically, most student loans are backed by the government, not all, but a majority of them are backed by the government. We want to create an incentive for students to go to school. And if the money that they get from these scholarships can only be used for school goods and for paying tuition, things of this nature, then that means that money is more than likely going to go to the school. And anything that doesn't, they already get tax money from. So why would we start to tax student loans or scholarships and student loans? These same things, student loans, most of them come from the government. Scholarships are independent. They do come from schools. So I didn't need to make that differential there. But there's also this talk of going after college endowments, and both of these conversations are happening separately, or at least tangentially adjacent from one another. Should we be able to tax college endowments on a higher level? Well, Republicans almost immediately say yes. And when I say Republicans, I mean the ones that are partisans, that are going off of political bias, rather than the principal Republicans that would say no. Okay, these schools are allowed to save their own money. They are allowed to use the returns on their endowment, which will be taxed anyway when they take it out of the investment fund. If they set it up properly, it won't be taxed when it's going in or there, because you're not going to tax something based on unrealized gains. Then when they finally do realize those gains, they take that money out. Then, in theory, that goes towards covering costs at the school, and it will be spent, and therefore it will be taxed. And also just taking it out itself, they have to report that, so therefore it will be taxed. And I think that system, the one in which we allow endowments to continue to grow, we tax them as they take out, but if they leave them in, they can actually retain some of the interest, and whether it be in dividend payments, whether it be just through raw growth of the portfolio. And then as you sell, you realize the gains from that. You have to pay taxes on that, and then you can still reallocate it. I think that's a completely fair system if it's going to be based anything like the current tax system that we have for normal investors. There shouldn't be any special exception for endowments. And if there are certain ones that are on the books, I think those can actually be taken back because you have places like Yale, Princeton, Harvard, and let's be clear, these are the exceptions, not the rules. A lot of schools' endowments are not like this, but a lot of those schools' endowments, in theory, can make enough money before taxes in order to run most of their operations, not all of their research, MIT especially, not all of the research programs that they do, and not all the extra funding that goes to that sort of thing, but they can run the normal school operations, school and board, heat, all the normal overhead, even most of the salaries for the teachers and the people who have tenure, that kind of thing. So those sort of systems that already exist there and have lots of money behind them are able to basically be self-sustaining. In theory, they could not charge students any tuition and still break even. Then again, they would start losing money eventually because there are obviously expansions that need to be done. There are extra programs that need to be added. They need to change out departments, that sort of thing. So not trying to be as naive to say that, well, this could basically cover everything forever. But the point being that if we provide incentives to allow the endowments to continue to grow, and the talk of taxing endowments has been back and forth. Nobody has directly said that we should tax them on even unrealized gains, so any growth that they have within those endowments can be taxed directly, or at least the equivalent value can be taxed and therefore be paid out by the university. Nobody has gone that far yet, but if the discussion heads that way, which I feel like it very well will, because the partisans don't really care about the principle of the matter, they just want to own the libs, they just want to cause pain to the other side. This is a dangerous precedent, especially as we've talked about unrealized gains before on the show. It is not a topic that I love coming up, and I'm not a fan of it overall. If you want to listen to that episode, it's probably about 50 episodes back, in the thumbnail actually says something about it, and so does the description, so it's within this playlist if you want to go find it and hear the more in-depth breakdown of unrealized gains and why they are a bad idea. But considering we have an article from the Gyro, let's actually read into what's going on here. And to be fair, they acknowledge that this idea is not 100% baked yet. It's half-baked. It's getting there. But the fact that it's even on the table is something that should be concerning to some people, because we need to limit the amount of taxes in general. So if they're trying to anybody's trying to offset certain extra costs that they're putting into the system and they're proposing taxes, maybe there should be a way to actually fund it without having to go through taxes, or maybe it's not worth funding if you have to raise taxes on any one individual. Just a theory, and one that comes from a very limited small government perspective, and one that comes from a person who doesn't necessarily love taxes, as most people don't, but not just on the practical level of I have to give money to the government, but on a more base level is the way I would say it, from a first principles sort of basis. But that's besides the point. Let's actually read the quote here. Quote, "The recommendations are still evolving, and it's unclear how close any of them will get to being implemented. Regardless, advocates across higher education say that they are alarmed to see such proposals gain traction at all with Republicans. It's shocking to me because of the amount of cuts it is not happening in reaction to like a budget crisis, like a recession. This really tests different in a sense, or it feels different in a sense that it is not something that there is an external push or need for," end quote. And that's the part that I agree with. Even if I don't agree with liberals all the time, and I definitely don't agree with liberals all the time, and also I don't agree with Republicans all the time. I most definitely agree with that point. And the author is from the Associated Press, so they're including some pieces, some quotes that are a little bit more liberal-leaning, a little bit more liberal bias in nature. But I definitely agree with that sentiment, which is it is not necessarily needed, especially under a Trump term where he says he's going to lower taxes, he's going to make things more affordable, he's going to unleash the American economy. And that involves actually in unlocking the potential of our colleges and universities in order to make sure that we have a workforce that is not only only plugging away, but also creating, innovating, truly tapping into their potential. So the idea under an administration like that they're going to propose new taxes just to go after the schools. I'm not saying just to go after the schools. There are legitimate reasons that they can provide, but it feels as though it is something, especially when the ethos of this administration is we want to lower taxes, we want to lower costs for people, that they would propose something like this. It feels as though the main motivation would be going after what they see as political enemies, which are the universities and these different bastions of liberal thinking. Which, if you want to be partisan and vindictive, fair enough, go right for it. That's not the world that I want to live in. That's not the United States I want to live in. I want to live in one that is based off principle. And of course, that's never going to happen. But my question would be, can you find a justification? So if you're going to go for it and you're going to try to get around just the principled argument, then you would have to, I think, to make a legitimate argument, you would have to say that this is fair game because they have done the exact same thing to conservative institutions. And while they have done it to some conservative institutions by limiting their power, so to speak, that doesn't actually mean, and I repeat, it doesn't actually mean that there was something exactly the same here. It doesn't mean that there was a Hillsdale or a Liberty, which are notorious conservative campuses, that actually were sitting there and had their tax status changed because they were being targeted. And to pretend as though that would be on the same scale as doing it to all universities, which in general are perceived as leaning liberal, I think this would be a large overstep. I don't think it would be a good retaliatory action into anything in order to set the basis and ensure that the liberals know that there are consequences to their actions. It truly feels vindictive and more of a, oh, let's rub it in their face that we have control now. So think about it. Should these sort of scholarships, should these different types of funding that schools give out, student loans, should those be taxed? Should endowments be taxed? All of these questions are imminent. They're ones that we're going to have. There's no doubt about it. But I think that every person should at least give it a thought, because I wasn't thinking about it until I read this article, and it brought me back to multiple episodes we've done in the past. And it's a good conversation because it also talks about the underlying ethos of the party right now, which is we are in power. Are they going to go on a principled stance and try to stay in line with what they promised the people? Or are they going to take the we have power and we're going to be vindictive stance, which may actually end up hurting them more than they realize? But hey, that's enough on that one. Let's jump into our daily delight. And this one is a little bit more goofy. It's not necessarily a particular clip, but rather one that talks about why your dog loves sleeping next to you. And I think that if you want a little read to understand the behavior of your dogs a little bit more, to see some cute photos that are involved there, that's the one you should go read. All of that, including the article from earlier today, all of them will be linked in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post this episode on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I post links to them so you can come directly to them. And on Tuesday and Thursday, I also post links to 6 and 6, which is a international-based story day where we talk about 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.